This episode, Bismarck hated bureaucracy, should we? From the Iron and Inkwell series is brought to you by Vizkard Studio.
The name Bismarck. For many, it immediately conjures images of the Iron Chancellor, doesn't it? The architect of German unification, a undisputed master of realpolitik. But what if we told you that beneath that formidable, that famously steely exterior, and beyond the grand historical narratives we often encounter, lay a surprisingly rich tapestry of personal observations, quiet wisdom, and profoundly hard-earned life lessons? Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a fascinating collection of sources. We'll be pulling extensive excerpts from his own reminiscences and political thoughts, alongside compelling biographical insights to uncover the less-known facets of Otto von Bismarck, the man behind the myth. Our mission is to move beyond mere events and explore the core beliefs that shaped this titan of the 19th century.
Exactly. We're not just tracing his grand political maneuvers, the what of his policies. Instead, we're really digging into the foundational principles and the very practical wisdom he accumulated, right from his earliest childhood experiences through to his most defining moments as a statesman. We want to understand what truly resonated with him, how he genuinely perceived the world, and perhaps most importantly, what enduring insights we can extract from his unique, often unsentimental perspective. You might just find some surprising lessons that profoundly challenge the common perceptions of this seemingly monolithic historical figure.
All right, let's unpack this and journey back. We'll start with his formative years, exploring how his environment and those early challenges began to shape his worldview, setting the stage for the colossus he would become. Early foundations. The man in formation. Early foundations. A childhood, education, and the roots of authority. So where do Bismarck's core ideas about authority and loyalty actually take root? It wasn't merely abstract statecraft he picked up later in life. It seems to have been something deeply ingrained, almost from the nursery, wouldn't you say?
It's a truly fascinating starting point because you see him exposed to influences that, on the surface, seem quite contradictory. From the tender age of 6 to 12, he attended Playman's preparatory school. Now, this school operated on the John's drill system, a pedagogical approach that was quite nationalistic and instilled strong German national impressions. You might anticipate this would lead him towards a pan-Germanic, perhaps even a more liberal, patriotic view.
Right, you'd think that kind of education would push him towards unification ideals early on.
Exactly. Yet Bismarck explicitly states that these impressions remain largely theoretical. They simply weren't strong enough to extirpate my innate Prussian monarchical sentiments. He was clear. His historical sympathies remained firmly on the side of authority. He genuinely believed in the unlimited authority of the old Prussian regal power as a foundational element of the state, though he prudently added that this was not the last word on effective governance. So, authority, yes, but maybe not absolute, unquestioned authority.
So even as a child, his default setting was already to champion the established order, almost instinctively distrusting anything that resembled revolutionary ideals. That's a powerful early indicator, isn't it? A real core belief.
It is, and it's absolutely crucial. This wasn't just a nascent political stance, it was a fundamental moral framework regarding order and rebellion, set surprisingly early in life. He viewed historical figures often glorified as liberators, like Harmodius and Aristogeiton, who famously assassinated a tyrant in ancient Athens, or Brutus, the slayer of Caesar, as nothing short of criminals in his childish ideas of justice.
Wow, criminals. That's strong language for figures often seen as heroes.
It really is. Even William Tell, the revered Swiss folk hero, he considered a rebel and murderer. This deep-seated conviction in legitimate, divinely constituted authority in order over upheaval is the bedrock for understanding his later actions. And his unwavering loyalty to the Prussian crown, even when he fundamentally disagreed with the king's personal decisions. It speaks to a profound internal consistency that began in childhood.
And his university days. Often, this is a crucible for youthful rebellion, for questioning everything, for forming radical new ideas. But it seems for Bismarck, it was, different. Not your typical rebellious student.
Very different. Unlike so many who find their intellectual or political turning point in student life, for Bismarck, accustomed to what he called the truer freedom of the country, his university experience was largely a passing phase. He didn't form many lasting friendships there, nor did he allow professors to leave a marked influence on his mind or character. He was, however, a prodigious reader, incredibly disciplined.
So he read a lot, but on his own terms.
Exactly. He absorbed only what genuinely interested him and then retained it with a formidable memory and quick understanding. Crucially, he actively avoided the dominant Hegelian philosophy, a choice he later credited with giving him a freshness and energy. This speaks volumes about his independent intellect and his rejection of prevailing academic trends in favor of what he considered practical, unclouded understanding.
Interesting. So he preferred practical insights over abstract theory, even then.
Absolutely. His favorite study was history, not necessarily to write it, but, as he put it, to derive a truer perception of the importance of events than many great scholars who have devoted their lives to historical research. He was looking for practical lessons. He pursued philosophy more as a man than as a student, focusing on Spinoza rather than Kant, Fichte, or Hegel. This highlights his clear preference for principles of belief and the practical conduct of life over abstract intellectual analysis.
So wisdom for living, not just intellectual games.
Precisely. Prioritizing tangible wisdom and an inner compass over theoretical frameworks. It's a key observation about his intellectual independence right from the start. B. First encounters with bureaucracy. A deep-seated aversion.
It's quite ironic, isn't it? A man who would eventually lead one of Europe's most organized and, well, famously efficient states held such a deep-seated aversion to bureaucracy from his earliest days. What exactly sparked this profound dislike?
His initial official career experiences were absolutely definitive in shaping this view. He started at Eton, and there he quickly formed a very poor opinion of our bureaucracy, in detail and collectively. A really negative first impression.
What did he dislike so much?
He characterized it as pedantic and estranged from practical life, perceiving it as overly rigid and disconnected from the real-world impact of its decisions. He felt they were just pushing paper, basically. There's a wonderful, if exasperating, anecdote that perfectly illustrates this. During a divorce case, an old bureaucrat named Pretorius, awakened at an untimely moment, distinctly told Bismarck, then a young referendarius or junior legal official.
Like an intern, almost.
Sort of, yeah. Pretorius says, "It is very annoying here, referendarius, when a man can do nothing for himself. I will show you how to do it." Just incredibly condescending and unhelpful. This specific interaction, among many differences of opinion between officials and governed, solidified his disdain for bureaucratic inflexibility and what he perceived as a fundamental lack of practical common sense.
You can almost feel his frustration. He clearly felt they were more concerned with process and maybe self-importance than actual purpose.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a youthful phase or a momentary frustration. It hardened into a lifelong conviction that profoundly informed his later administrative reforms. He really saw it as a systemic flaw, didn't he?
It seems so. It wasn't just a fleeting annoyance.
He absolutely did. His initial stint in official service was remarkably short-lived, precisely because of this. He made an attempt to resume his official career in 1844, again taking up duties as referendar at Potsdam, but it was almost immediately cut short because he quarreled with his superior.
He just couldn't toe the line, could he?
Apparently not. The story goes that after being kept waiting for an hour in the anteroom, a subtle power play in itself, he was curtly asked, "What do you want?" To this, Bismarck, with characteristic swiftness and pride, retorted, "I came to ask for leave of absence, but now I wish for permission to send in my resignation." Just like that.
Wow. Bold move. That tells you a lot about his personality.
It highlights his truculence and impatience. And, perhaps more significantly, his clear deficiency in subservience and ready obedience to authority, qualities that were then essential for promotion within the civil service. He simply wasn't built for unquestioning adherence to rigid, often irrational hierarchies.
His criticism extended beyond just inefficiency, though. He also observed how bureaucracy could evolve to become self-serving rather than genuinely serving the public good. That sounds incredibly relevant today, doesn't it?
It is, and his observations here are incredibly insightful and surprisingly timeless. He sharply contrasted earlier government officials, whom he saw as toiling honestly and conscientiously for justice, with the modern provincial presidents of his time. These newer officials, he noted, were increasingly driven by career ambition and ministerial favor. They engaged in conspicuous zeal and valueless bureaucratic experiments, often at the expense of genuine local self-government. All about climbing the ladder.
So more focused on impressing their bosses than serving the people.
Pretty much. He shrewdly observed that provincial president posts, which once were often lifetime commitments for local dignitaries, had become the lowest step in the ladder of the higher administration, sought after by young assessors who have a justifiable ambition to make a career. This shift, he argued, led directly to the aggravation of bureaucracy, increase in the number of officials and of their powers and interference in private life. More red tape, more meddling.
And less impartiality, too, it seems.
Yes, he also questioned the impartiality of judicial and administrative decisions, especially in country districts where the parties stand in acute opposition to each other, implying that political motivations could subtly or not so subtly taint justice. It's a profound observation on how systems can devolve when incentives shift from public good to personal career advancement, leading to administrative bloat and a dangerous erosion of public trust. A lesson for any era, really. See Junkertham and pragmatism. Beyond class interests.
Bismarck is often simplistically labeled as a Junker, implying a narrow, self-serving aristocratic agenda. How did he actually reconcile his aristocratic background with his broader political views? And what surprising wisdom does this reveal about his approach to governing? Was he just looking out for his own class?
It's a crucial point of nuance because he explicitly clarified this, dispelling the stereotype of a purely class-driven figure. He said, and this is important, "I have never regarded birth as a substitute for want of ability."
Merit over birthright, essentially.
Exactly. That's a fundamental distinction. His advocacy for landed property, for instance, was not purely for proprietors of my own class, but because he genuinely saw in the decline of agriculture one of the greatest dangers to our permanence as a state.
So it was about state stability, not just helping fellow aristocrats.
Precisely. It demonstrates a deeply pragmatic, state-first approach that transcended narrow class interest. His own family background further shaped this perspective. His father, he noted, was free from aristocratic prejudices, and his mother was the daughter of Mencken, a privy councillor to 3 kings, which instilled in him a perspective that valued merit and service beyond inherited rank alone. This blended background gave him a unique vantage point, allowing him to value both tradition and efficiency, aristocratic lineage and practical competence.
So his ideal for a monarchy wasn't about absolute power for the nobility or unchecked royal prerogative, but something far more balanced for the enduring good of the state itself. That sounds like a sophisticated vision for his time.
Precisely. His ideal, as he articulated it, was a monarchy which should be so far controlled by an independent representation that the monarchical power wasn't the last word.
So checks and balances even within a monarchy.
Absolutely. It suggests a nuanced view of power, one that, while firmly monarchical, acknowledged the need for checks and balances to ensure state stability and competence, rather than falling into the trap of pure absolutism or a self-serving aristocratic oligarchy. He believed that true strength for the state came from effective governance and broad, if controlled, support, not merely from inherited privilege.
And he saw the monarchy itself as a unifying force.
Yes, he recognized a deep psychological truth about national cohesion. The Germans' love of fatherland has need of a prince on whom it can concentrate its attachment. He understood dynastic loyalty as a critical, almost emotional component of national identity and unity. It was a practical tool for state building that channeled sentiment toward stability, using that existing loyalty for a larger purpose. D, personal character and faith. The inner compass.
We've explored the public and political Bismarck, but what about his personal beliefs, his inner compass? What truly sustained him through some incredibly difficult and often morally, let's say, ambiguous times? It's surprising to find that for Bismarck, even amidst ruthless realpolitik, a profound personal faith and family ties weren't just comforting, they were essential to his very existence.
Indeed, he confessed as much in powerful letters to his wife, revealing a surprising spiritual depth beneath his public persona. Reflecting on past folly at Wiesbaden, he wrote, and I quote directly here because it's quite revealing, "May it please God to fill with his clear and strong wine this vessel in which the champagne of 21 years foamed so uselessly." A real sense of wanting redemption, perhaps.
It's quite a metaphor. Almost sounds like a conversion experience.
It has that feel. He then states in a profoundly personal confession, "I do not understand how a man who reflects on himself and still knows and will know nothing of God can endure his life for contempt and weariness." He saw faith as necessary for meaning.
So life without God felt empty, unbearable to him.
That's exactly what he implies. He continues with a remarkable candor. "If, as then, I were to live without God, thee and the children, I do not know why I should not put life aside like a dirty shirt, and yet most of my acquaintances live thus."
That's incredibly powerful, a very raw confession of the need for spiritual and familial anchors, certainly not the image of the Iron Chancellor we usually hold.
It really isn't. It offers a rare, almost vulnerable glimpse into the internal life of a man known for his external force and political ruthlessness. This wasn't just a political or social conviction for him. It was a deep, personal one. Faith, family, and a profound sense of purpose were intrinsically intertwined for him. It suggests that his public iron will and unwavering determination were perhaps supported by this deep inner framework, a wisdom that found meaning and resilience beyond mere political machinations.
It humanizes him significantly, doesn't it? Showing that even the most pragmatic leaders can draw strength from deeply personal convictions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he linked Christianity directly to the duty of princes, stating, "Only Christianity can make princes what they ought to be, and free them from that conception of life, which causes many of them to seek in the position given them by God nothing but the means to a life of pleasure and irresponsibility."
So faith wasn't just personal solace, but a moral requirement for good leadership.
Exactly. He sought a clear connection between his personal beliefs and his view of effective governance. A fascinating dimension to the man. 2. The statesman's crucible. Principles and practice. A monarchy versus parliament. The iron dice of principle.
Bismarck famously clashed with emerging parliamentary ideas throughout his career. It seems for him this wasn't just a policy debate, but a battle for the very soul of the state and its legitimate foundation. That's a high-stakes interpretation. What was the core of his opposition, and what enduring wisdom did he draw from this deep-seated conflict?
Indeed, for Bismarck, this was no mere political squabble over policies. He saw it as a fundamental strife of principles, which during this year has shattered Europe to its foundations, in which no compromise is possible. He saw it as an existential fight.
No middle ground possible in his eyes.
None whatsoever. He declared, with stark clarity, they rest on opposite bases. The one draws its law from what is called the will of the people. In truth, however, from the law of the strongest on the barricades. So mob rule, basically. The other, he continued, rests on authority created by God, an authority by the grace of God, and seeks its development in organic connection with the existing and constitutional legal status.
So divine right and historical tradition versus popular will, which he equated with chaos.
Precisely. This reveals his deeply conservative conviction that true authority stemmed from divine right and historical continuity, not from popular sentiment or the shifting sands of fleeting majorities.
But one could argue that by rejecting popular will and parliamentary debate so strongly, he risked creating deep divisions that could threaten the state's soul in the long run. How would he counter that? He must have seen that risk.
He was utterly convinced that the decision on these principles will come not by parliamentary debate, not by majorities of 11 votes. Sooner or later, the God who directs the battle will cast his iron dice.
The iron dice, meaning force, ultimately. War.
It strongly implies that yes. This is a powerful, almost fatalistic statement that reveals his conviction that ultimate political outcomes are decided by forces beyond mere parliamentary votes, often implying the decisive use of power, whether military or otherwise. He had a remarkably low opinion of the legislative bodies of his time, considering the political incapacity of our chambers a significant problem. He felt they just weren't up to the job.
He didn't pull any punches in his criticism.
Not at all. He observed how our political leaders published their incapacity in its complete nakedness as a model and pattern. And he even said he dreaded nothing more than to be considered a parliamentarian. That was practically an insult to him.
So for him, the inherent weakness of parliamentary systems was actually a greater threat to the state than any divisions it might ostensibly heal.
That seems to be his calculation, yes.
Right.
He also specifically rejected the idea of simply copying foreign models for governance, preferring an organic, homegrown approach. Correct. He truly believed a nation's institution should grow from its own soil.
He wasn't keen on imports.
Very much so. She strongly opposed the introduction of civil marriage, for example, calling it a foreign institution, an imitation of French legislation. He believed it would simply serve to undermine the belief in Christianity among the people, adding that a certain degree of positive Christianity is necessary for the common man if he is not to become dangerous to human society. He saw it as a social glue.
Interesting connection between civil law and social order there.
Yes. It shows his concern for social cohesion and traditional values over imported legal frameworks. He feared that abstract foreign ideas could unravel the social fabric. He believed Prussia's strength came from its old Prussian constitution as a natural growth, arguing that dark points should be decided by reference to older practice, much like an Englishman would search for precedents, rather than by absolute principles of jurisprudence derived from Roman law or English constitutional theory.
So stick to what works, what grew organically in Prussia.
Exactly. This highlights his consistent preference for organic development, pragmatism, and tradition over abstract, imported ideologies that might not fit the unique character and history of the Prussian state. It's a valuable lesson in understanding a nation's specific context and resisting one-size-fits-all solutions. B. The art of political egoism, guiding state action.
Many historians view Bismarck as the ultimate pragmatist, a master of realpolitik. But did he have a single overarching guiding principle for foreign policy, beyond mere power grabs or opportunistic maneuvers? Something that consistently anchored his decision-making?
He absolutely did, and he articulated a very clear, unsentimental principle early in his career, in a speech in 1850. While later events ironically mirrored some of his initial warnings, his statement reveals his core thinking.
What did he say?
The only sound principle of action for a great state is political egoism and not romanticism, and it is unworthy of a great state to fight for any matter which does not concern its own interests.
Political egoism, state self-interest above all else.
That was it, a foundational piece of wisdom for him, stripping away sentimentality, abstract ideals, and altruism from international relations. It was about cold, hard, national self-interest, no time for feelings.
So, no fighting for abstract ideals or for popularity on the world stage or to simply please other nations. It was strictly about national self-interest, clearly defined, with no room for emotional baggage.
Precisely. He was deeply skeptical of those who would blow the trumpet with the breath of popularity and all the time to sit warming himself by his fireside while he leaves it to the rifleman who lies bleeding on the snow.
Wow, that's a powerful image. A real contempt for armchair warriors.
Absolutely. It captures his disdain for politicians who would advocate for wars based on fleeting public sentiment without counting the real cost. He stressed the absolute need for a reason for the war which will be valid when the war is over, implying that any conflict must have clear, long-term, tangible state interest as its objective. You need a good reason after the fighting stops.
Not just a reason to start it.
Exactly. This is a profound piece of wisdom, cautioning against wars of sentiment or popular pressure without clearly defined, enduring national objectives. He consistently sought to avoid engaging in conflicts that didn't directly benefit Prussia, such as during the Crimean War. He saw no reason for risking our long-continued peace with Russia for a cause that didn't directly serve Prussian interests.
Even if public opinion pushed for it.
Especially then. For him, a great state must be ruthlessly rational about where and why it expends its blood and treasure. Popularity wasn't a factor in that calculation. See Blood and Iron, the practical necessity of force.
This is perhaps his most famous and certainly most often misunderstood phrase, blood and iron. How did Bismarck arrive at this stark conclusion about the indispensable role of military power in statecraft? Was it just a call for aggression or something more nuanced?
His observations, particularly after the political failures of 1848 and the humiliation of Olmütz in 1850, led him to a very clear, if brutal, understanding. He concluded that the Gordian knot of German circumstance was not to be untied by the gentle methods of dual policy, it could only be cut by the sword.
Diplomacy wasn't enough to solve Germany's problems, he thought.
He became convinced of that. This indicates a clear recognition that certain fundamental problems, especially those involving core state interests or structures, simply transcend diplomacy alone and require decisive, even violent solutions. He saw that the failure of Radowitz's unification policy in 1850 was because Prussia's army was not strong enough. War would have been followed by defeat and disaster. A direct link between military weakness and political failure.
So that failure directly led to building up the army.
It deeply informed King William I's decision to prioritize strengthening the army, yes, a policy Bismarck wholeheartedly supported and championed when he came to power.
And the specific quote itself, the Blood and Iron speech from 1862, what was its original context and meaning? It's often presented as pure militarism, isn't it?
It is, but the context is crucial. It was during a critical budget debate in the Prussian Landtag regarding army reform. He famously stated, "Put the strongest possible military power, in other words, as much blood and iron as you can, into the hands of the King of Prussia. Then he will be able to carry out the policy you wish. It cannot be done with speeches and celebrations and songs. It can only be done by blood and iron."
So he was telling the parliament, your goals require military strength.
Essentially, yes. This was not, as often simplistically interpreted, a call for war for its own sake. Rather, it was an articulation of the absolute necessity of military strength as the indispensable foundation for effective policy, especially in the context of German unification. He recognized that intellectual arguments, popular sentiment, and parliamentary debates were utterly insufficient without the backing of real, tangible force. It was a brutal realism about the nature of power in international relations.
Hard power dictates outcomes where soft power fails, in his view.
Pretty much. And did this belief in the necessity of military preparedness and strength endure throughout his career, even after Germany's unification? Did he ever soften this view?
Did he ever think, okay, we've unified now, we can relax?
No, absolutely not. It became a cornerstone of his foreign policy and remained constant. Later, when discussing military budget proposals, he again emphasized that these were not for war, but for peace. But they must indeed be prepared for war, for that was a danger that was never absent. He reviewed 40 years of European history to show that scarcely a single year had gone by in which there had not been the probability of a great European conflict, a war of coalitions in which all the great states of Europe would be ranged on one side or the other. He saw constant danger.
A very pessimistic or maybe realistic view of Europe.
Perhaps realistic, given the times. His wisdom here is that preparedness is the ultimate deterrent, and that the strength of Germany was the security of Europe. For him, peace was not a natural state, but a deliberate achievement, constantly maintained through vigilance and the undeniable capability for war.
A practical lesson about the continuous nature of international risk, one he never abandoned. A stark reminder that even the most powerful nations must remain ever vigilant. Diplomatic strategy. Beyond honesty and towards effectiveness, Bismarck's diplomatic methods were often controversial, perceived as cunning, even ruthless. What were his fundamental observations on the nature of international relations that informed his often unconventional, almost manipulative strategy? Did he just think everyone else was playing dirty, so he had to as well?
His early assessment of diplomatic work at Frankfurt was stark and deeply cynical. He described it as, at best, nothing but a mutual suspicion and espionage, if only there was anything to spy out and to hide. It is pure trifles with which they worry themselves. He was really unimpressed.
He found it petty and pointless.
Pretty much. He found diplomatists much more absurd than the member of the Second Chamber in his conscious dignity. He concluded early on that diplomacy at that time was often characterized by wanton and ineffective deceit. This perception that dishonesty and manipulation were already endemic in international relations profoundly shaped his own willingness to employ similar tactics if they served the state's interest.
So he thought, if you can't beat them, join them, but do it better.
Something like that. He believed he was merely playing the game as it was already being played, but with a greater skill, clarity of purpose, and a much sharper edge.
So he didn't just believe in actively controlling the narrative. He seemed to believe in leveraging any means necessary, even unconventional ones, to achieve his goals, rather than adhering to rigid diplomatic protocol. This sounds like an early form of information warfare, almost.
Absolutely. He became a master of information management and manipulation. He managed the press, both by procuring the insertion of articles favorable to Prussia's aims and by tracking down hostile articles or inconvenient information. He knew the power of the press.
Playing offense and defense with information.
Exactly. He famously learned to distrust official police intelligence, preferring his own agents, and even went so far as to pay a compositor in Freiburg for information on the Ultramontane Party, a powerful Catholic political movement at the time. He wanted his own intel.
Going straight to the source, bypassing official channels.
He famously utilized the Welfenfond, originally the private property of the exiled King of Hanover, a rival dynasty which was appropriated for secret service and especially for purposes of the press to counter opposition, using confiscated funds for black ops, essentially.
That's definitely playing hardball.
It demonstrates his clear understanding of the power of information in public opinion and a pragmatic willingness to use what others might call fraud and falsehood if it served the state's interest. He often believed only lying, only fraud and falsehood can bring their projects to maturity for his opponents. He wasn't above using any tool in his arsenal.
And the Ems telegram incident is, of course, the quintessential example of this strategic manipulation, isn't it? It feels like a moment right out of a spy thriller, a pivotal moment.
Indeed, it's a textbook case of Bismarck's diplomatic genius and his calculated approach to triggering a desired political outcome. When he received King William Masursa's telegram, recounting a rather cordial but ultimately unsatisfactory interaction with the French ambassador Benedetti, Bismarck immediately saw an opportunity.
He saw an opening.
A big one. He drafted a statement by meticulously keeping to the very words of the original telegram. But crucially, he left out much and arranged it so that it should convey to the reader the impression, not of what had really occurred, but of what he would have wished should happen.
So he didn't lie outright, but he edited it to change the entire meaning.
Precisely. This calculated editing, transforming what Moltke famously called a chamade, a retreat or parley, into a fanfare, a declaration of defiance, illustrates his unparalleled mastery of strategic communication. He used it to achieve a desired political outcome, even if it meant a significant breach of conventional diplomatic honesty. It's a key observation on how perception can be deliberately manipulated in statecraft to shift public opinion, inflame national sentiment, and ultimately force an adversary's hand. Genius, but ruthless. E, the German question, and Prussian identity. A shifting vision.
Bismarck's journey on German unity is remarkably complex, even surprising, because he initially seemed to resist a broader German identity in favor of staunch Prussian particularism. How did his views evolve over time, and what profound wisdom underpins his final unifying approach? He wasn't always Mr. Germany, was he?
You're right to highlight that initial resistance. His starting point was a strong particularist view. He explicitly stated, "I have no interest in Germany outside Prussia. Württemberg and Bavaria were to him foreign states." Pretty blunt.
Prussia first, last and always.
That was the initial stance. He firmly rejected the idea of sacrificing Prussian independence for a vague, united Germany, famously declaring, "Prussians we are, and Prussians we will remain." He even pointed out, quite tellingly, "I've never heard a Prussian soldier singing 'Was ist des deutschen Vaterland,' directly rejecting Arndt's romantic pan-Germanic ideals that were so popular at the time. His loyalty was unequivocally to Prussia first.
He feared any arrangement that would dilute its distinct identity or make it subservient to a larger, less defined German entity.
Exactly. Yet he ultimately unified Germany under Prussian leadership. It feels like a complete reversal. So what was the underlying wisdom in his later seemingly transformed approach? It couldn't have been a simple change of heart, could it? Just waking up one day feeling German.
Doesn't seem like his style.
Not at all. It wasn't a change of heart, but a profound shift in strategic thinking. His genius lay not in abandoning his core Prussian focus, but in a brilliant, pragmatic maneuver, making their interests coincide with the interests of a greater Germany.
Aligning interests, not forcing submission.
Precisely. After unification, for example, he maintained a remarkable leniency towards the southern German states, allowing them to retain certain diplomatic rights, to reconcile the King of Saxony to his new position, for instance. He didn't want to rub their noses in defeat. He shrewdly recognized that forcing unity through subjugation or humiliation would only create lasting resentment and instability. You needed willing partners, not just conquered territories.
And did that work? Did they come around?
His wisdom was proven when, despite having their own envoys, the King of Saxony immediately forwarded a special invitation to a European Congress directly to Berlin, demonstrating loyalty to the new federal structure. A clear sign of buy-in. He further elaborated on this, stating he made their interests coincide with the interests of Germany, and from this time they have been the most loyal supporters, first of the Confederation and afterwards of the Empire.
So making them stakeholders was key.
Absolutely. He was quick to acknowledge this, often saying they, the dynasties, were the true guardians of German unity, not the Reichstag and its parties. This shows a deep understanding of human and specifically dynastic psychology. Align their personal and institutional interests with the larger national goal, and they become powerful, willing allies rather than reluctant subjects.
Still pragmatic, even in unification.
Always. He also believed the German people and its national life cannot be portioned out as private possessions of princely houses, highlighting his pragmatic recognition of the national sentiment while still respecting established power structures. It was about effective, long-term state building using all the pieces on the board. F foreign policy, beyond personal sentiment.
You mentioned earlier how Bismarck believed that even the king shouldn't let personal feelings or familial ties guide foreign policy, especially when it came to alliances. Could you elaborate on that wisdom? It seems so counterintuitive to the royal norms of the time, where dynastic connections often were foreign policy. Marrying off your kids was diplomacy.
Yes, this was a critical foundational piece of his diplomatic philosophy. In a letter to Gerlach, a close advisor to the king, he explicitly argued against letting the king subordinate the interests of the country to his own feelings of love or hate towards foreigners.
Keep your personal feelings out of state business.
Completely. He made it unequivocally clear that if he does so, he is responsible to God and not to me, and therefore I am silent on that point. A subtle way of saying it's wrong, but ultimately your call, your majesty. This is a stark declaration of the absolute separation of personal sentiment, no matter how deeply felt, from the cold, rational calculation of state interests in foreign policy, a critical observation for any leader seeking to conduct effective international relations.
What was his standard, then, if not sentiment?
He famously articulated his own standard. I do not borrow the standard for my conduct towards foreign governments from stagnating antipathies, but only from the standard of usefulness and of disuse. Is it useful to Prussia or not? That's the only question.
Pure utility. And he also foresaw that alliances based on clear, tangible shared interest would ultimately be far more durable and reliable than alliances based on historical ties, royal marriages, or even shared emotional bonds. That's quite a cynical view of international friendship, but perhaps a realistic one.
He certainly thought so. He questioned the true value of an alliance with Austria and England, for example, pointing out that Austria's fundamental interest was preventing Prussia from growing stronger and then lessening her influence in Germany. Their core interests clashed.
So no matter how friendly they seemed, their basic goals were opposed.
Exactly. He observed that even if he adopted their standpoint, we should have to begin with France in order to bring them to a recognition of it. He saw the tangled web of interests. This highlights a core piece of his wisdom. Always assess alliances based on clear, tangible mutual interests and strategic utility, rather than allowing historical ties or emotional bonds to cloud judgment. He saw that sentiment could shift, but fundamental national interests were more enduring.
And his relationship with Russia fits this model.
Perfectly. His approach to Russia, for instance, was based on the pragmatic assessment of not having divergent interests of capital importance, which led to a more stable and predictable relationship, despite the ideological differences between the two empires. He looked for practical alignment, not sentimental attachment, as the bedrock of stable foreign relations. It was all about the realpolitik. 3. Bismarck's wisdom. Reflections and lessons learned. A human calculation versus divine direction. A humbling perspective.
Despite his formidable reputation for meticulous planning, strategic genius, and a near unbreakable will, Bismarck frequently acknowledged forces far beyond his own control. What was his profound wisdom on this interplay between human agency and divine direction? Or perhaps just fate, and how did he navigate it? You wouldn't necessarily expect humility from him.
It's surprising, isn't it? He revealed a remarkable and deeply humbling perspective on this, especially for someone so renowned for his calculating mind. He stated quite candidly, "The longer I work at politics, the smaller is my belief in human calculation."
Really, after all his successes based on calculation.
That's what he said. A profound admission. He often saw God's hand in outcomes, expressing gratitude for God's assistance so far, raises in me the confidence that the Lord is able to turn our errors to our own good, that I experience daily to my wholesome humiliation. So, he believed even his mistakes could be redeemed or used by a higher power, a kind of faith in providence.
That suggests a certain acceptance, maybe even peace, amidst the chaos he often navigated.
It seems so. He further reflected this in his calm, almost stoic acceptance of fate. As God will. Everything here is only a question of time. Peoples and men, wisdom and folly, war and peace, they come and go like rain and water, and the sea alone remains. There's nothing on earth but hypocrisy and deceit.
Wow, that's a pretty bleak outlook at the end there. Hypocrisy and deceit. Sounds world-weary.
It does. A blend of deep faith and almost cynical realism, perhaps. It absolutely offers a crucial insight into his worldview. It suggests that while he planned rigorously and acted decisively, he also recognized the unpredictable nature of events and the inherent limitations of human foresight.
So plan your best, but know you're not fully in control.
Exactly. This wisdom perhaps allowed him to adapt, pivot, and persist through setbacks without being completely crushed by them. He viewed them not as personal failures in a deterministic sense, but as part of a larger, often divinely guided process. This outlook also informed his belief that one must always be prepared and act to the best of their ability, because while the Lord is able to turn our errors to our own good, this doesn't absolve one from their duty to exert effort and take action.
So it wasn't passive fatalism. It was faith combined with duty.
Precisely. A pragmatic balance of profound faith and relentless work, recognizing both human agency and the limits of human control. B. Handling conflict. Directness and provocation.
Bismarck was notorious for his direct and sometimes aggressive style in diplomacy and politics. He wasn't one to shy away from a confrontation. How did this manifest in his interactions, and what did he aim to achieve with such a provocative approach? Was it just his personality or a tactic?
A bit of both, probably, but definitely a tactic. An anecdote about smoking at the Frankfurt Diet perfectly illustrates his method. When Austria alone among the envoys smoked, asserting its dominance, and others, like the Prussian envoy Rochot, didn't dare.
Smoking was a status symbol.
In that context, yes, Bismarck saw his moment. He asked for a light from the presiding state, the Austrian envoy, just casually asked for a light. This act, seemingly trivial, was a deliberate, audacious assertion of Prussia's equal standing, a subtle but unmistakable signal that diplomatic protocol would no longer be dictated solely by Austria.
A power move with a cigar.
Exactly. The other envoys immediately sent home a report on it, recognizing its significance, and eventually even envoys from smaller states began to smoke to assert their own dignity. It was a brilliant nonverbal provocation that subtly but effectively shifted the power dynamic. On another occasion, when the Austrian envoy Thun received Bismarck in his shirt sleeves, an informal act of disrespect.
A deliberate snub.
Almost certainly. Bismarck, without missing a beat, responded, "You are quite right, it is very hot," and promptly took off his own coat, mirroring the informal slight to assert parity. He wouldn't be put down.
He gave as good as he got, and he wasn't afraid to challenge opponents directly, even with threats of duels, which seems almost unheard of in high-level diplomacy today. He seemed to view confrontation as a strategic tool rather than something to be avoided.
Indeed. During a heated exchange with an opponent in the chamber, when accused of being mauvais coucheur, a picker of quarrels, Bismarck's response was a chilling implication of a duel.
What did he say?
He said, "Why should we drive? There is space enough in the palace garden here, Prussian officers live over the way, and there are Austrian officers in the neighborhood. The whole affair can be settled in a quarter of an hour. Basically, let's step outside."
Wow, he really called his bluff.
It demonstrates his willingness to push confrontations to their extreme, a tactic he understood could often break an impasse or expose an opponent's weakness, especially if they were timid or unprepared for such a challenge. He called it not demanding too much dexterity of our diplomacy to call upon it to postpone, avoid, or bring about the war as necessity might require. He mastered the art of calibrated aggression to achieve his objectives.
Using personal force and psychological pressure to underline political will. A dangerous game, but effective for him. C. Health and resilience. The personal cost of statesmanship. The intense, relentless demands of his career clearly took a severe toll on Bismarck. We're talking about a man who wielded immense power, but what does his experience tell us about the very real personal sacrifices inherent in a life of public service at the highest levels? It wasn't easy, physically or mentally.
Not at all. His health struggles were significant and frequent, a constant, often debilitating companion to his political exertions. After his demanding time in Frankfurt, the continual anxiety and work, joined to irregular hours and careless habits, led to serious illnesses. In St. Petersburg, he suffered from gastric and rheumatic affection, an injury to the leg, and later inflammation of the lungs and rheumatic fever, which doctors expected to be fatal. He really pushed his body to the limit.
Multiple serious, life-threatening conditions.
Yes, he suffered grievous sickness and was left for periods crippled and in great pain. These weren't isolated incidents, but recurring battles against physical deterioration due to the immense strains of his office.
And this wasn't just physical pain. It profoundly impacted his personality and continued to plague him through his later career, even at the height of his power. It sounds like a cautionary tale for anyone in high office.
Absolutely. The prolonged illness left him with nervous irritation and restlessness, making immense labor doubly distasteful. You can imagine trying to run a country while feeling awful.
Made him harder to work with, probably.
He admitted that he lost some of his good humor and became irritable and more exacting as a result. Later, in moments of deep depression, he reflected with a poignant sense of self-awareness that the king scarcely knows how he is riding a good horse to death, acknowledging the immense personal cost of his dedication to the state.
That's heartbreaking, really. Feeling used up by the job.
It is. Even after a later reconciliation with the Emperor William II, he expressed missing the kindly courtesy of his old master, William II, who had known so well how to allow the king to be forgotten in the friend. He missed that human connection. This is a powerful lesson about the profound and often overlooked toll of relentless public service and the very real human limits, even for the most determined and iron-willed individuals.
His personal suffering underscores the wisdom that no leader, however great, is impervious to the physical and mental strains of their immense responsibilities. A crucial, often forgotten dimension of statesmanship. D. Humor and wit. A sharpened tool. For all his seriousness, his strategic brilliance, and his often gruff demeanor, Bismarck also possessed a very sharp wit. It wasn't just for entertainment, was it? He clearly used it as a sophisticated political tool, a way to disarm, critique, or even humiliate.
Oh, definitely. His letters, thankfully, are full of them, offering a wonderful, often dry contrast to his political gravitas. Describing a tedious fox hunting trip with his father, for instance, he paints a wonderfully dry, humorous picture. He details how they surround a clump of firs with the most sportsmanlike precautions, although we all, and probably father as well, are absolutely convinced that there is not a living creature in it except one or two old women gathering firewood.
Yep.
Just pure theater.
Chuckles. You can picture the scene, the elaborate setup for nothing.
Exactly. Then, after the dogs and men make strange noises to flesh out nothing, his father asks if he's seen anything, and Bismarck, with the most natural tone of astonishment that I can command, answers, "No, nothing at all." It shows his acute observational skills and his ability to find absurdity even in mundane rituals.
A dry wit, for sure. But how did he use it politically?
He famously used wit to dismiss political opponents or expose their folly with devastating precision. For instance, in a debate, he suggested that Germany unfortunately had many Coriolanus, only the Volsci are wanting.
A classical reference, meaning what exactly?
Coriolanus was a Roman general who betrayed Rome and joined its enemies, the Volsci. So Bismarck was saying Germany had plenty of potential traitors looking for foreign enemies to help them, but luckily the enemies weren't there. A very cutting way to question loyalty.
Ouch, that's sharp.
Very. He also made a wondrously sarcastic observation on the childish self-confidence of German political leaders who would publish their incapacity and its complete nakedness as a model and pattern, just savaging their incompetence with humor.
So his humor wasn't just for a laugh. It was often a tool for sharp critique, exposing pretense, demonstrating his intellectual superiority in debate, and at times disarming or humiliating his adversaries.
Exactly. It was a potent weapon in his diplomatic and political arsenal as much as any military budget. Wit as warfare. Modesty and victory. The art of lasting peace.
After the Franco-Prussian War, when Germany was undeniably victorious and Bismarck had achieved unification, his approach to the defeated seems surprisingly moderate, almost counterintuitive to his blood and iron image. What was his reasoning, and what profound wisdom does this exemplify about securing a truly lasting peace? You'd expect him to crush them.
This is a crucial, often overlooked aspect of his statesmanship and demonstrates a deep understanding of long-term stability. He openly explained his post-1870 peace terms with remarkable foresight. He knew people would criticize him for not taking more.
What did he say about that?
He anticipated the criticism. The newspapers will not be satisfied. The historian may very likely condemn our conventions. He may say, the stupid fellow might easily have asked for more. He would have got it. They would have had to give it him. His might was his right. He knew the temptation was there. But Bismarck prioritized enduring stability over maximal short-term gains. He stated, I was more anxious that these people should go away heartily satisfied. What is the use of treaties which men are forced to sign?
Forced treaties don't last, basically.
Yeah, that was his point. I know that they went away satisfied. I do not wish to press them or to take full advantage of the situation. The convention has its defects, but it is all the stronger on account of them. The imperfections made it more acceptable, more durable.
That's a truly powerful and counterintuitive idea. It challenges the conventional narrative of an uncompromising victor. It suggests that a victorious state's true strength isn't just in winning the war, but in winning the subsequent peace.
It is, and it reveals a crucial piece of his practical wisdom. He understood that true, lasting peace isn't secured by imposing maximal demands and crushing a defeated party completely. You need them to accept the new reality. Instead, it's about ensuring the defeated leave with enough dignity, enough of their interests preserved, and enough incentive to uphold the new order, rather than constantly plotting revenge. Don't create lasting grievances.
So his moderation towards Bavaria and others was strategic.
Absolutely. His moderation after 1870, including not pushing for large annexations from Bavaria and instead securing alliances, was a strategic move to heal old wounds and cement the new alliances that formed the German Empire. He convinced King William I, against his initial wishes, to adopt this point of view, ensuring that the events of this year should leave no feeling of hostility, thereby making the new empire as firm and indissoluble as any other state in Europe.
A mastery of not just winning the war, but winning the peace, by understanding human psychology and the long game of international relations. Really insightful. Enduring dangers. Perpetual preparedness. Finally, what was Bismarck's lasting observation about the unchanging, often harsh nature of international relations and the absolute perpetual need for preparedness, even in times of apparent peace? What did he teach us about the true cost of complacency? He never really thought peace was permanent, did he?
Not for a moment. Bismarck held a deeply cynical yet profoundly realistic view that war, was a danger that was never absent. It was always lurking. He made the striking observation that by reviewing 40 years of European history, scarcely a single year had gone by in which there had not been the probability of a great European conflict, a war of coalitions in which all the great states of Europe would be ranged on one side or the other.
He saw Europe as inherently unstable, constantly on the brink.
That was his assessment. This wasn't just a historical observation. It was a prediction for the future, a constant shadow over the European continent. This meant that Germany now, as before, must always be prepared. For the strength of Germany was the security of Europe.
Germany's strength preventing wider war.
That was his argument. A strong Germany could deter conflict, or at least contain it. He consistently emphasized that his military proposals were not for war, but for peace. Strength was the prerequisite for peace. This wisdom underscores the idea that peace is not a natural state or an end in itself, but rather a precarious condition that must be actively maintained and safeguarded through constant vigilance, strategic alliances, and undeniable military strength.
Neglecting preparedness was basically an open invitation to conflict, in his view.
Exactly. A timeless lesson he believed was eternally relevant. Never let your guard down. Outro. So, after digging into all this, what truly stands out to you from this deep dive into Bismarck's observations, lessons, and often surprising wisdom? His life teaches us, I think, that effective leadership often demands a rare, almost paradoxical blend of deeply held convictions, ruthless pragmatism, and a profound, sometimes humbling acceptance of forces beyond human control.
Yeah, that mix is fascinating.
From his early aversion to bureaucracy to his calculated use of blood and iron, and then that later wisdom in tempering victory, his career offers an incredibly rich tapestry of insights into the realities of power and governance.
He truly understood that character and conviction were as vital as military might, didn't he? And that genuine political strength often came from aligning diverse interests rather than simply crushing them. That surprised me a bit.
Me too, initially.
He saw the world with a clear, unsentimental eye, yet as we saw, he was deeply rooted in personal faith and a profound sense of duty, even when that duty rode a good horse to death. It's a complex, almost contradictory, but ultimately compelling figure whose lessons resonate far beyond his own era. So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, in our interconnected world? Perhaps Bismarck's most enduring wisdom is that while circumstances constantly change, the fundamental forces of human nature and state ambition remain. They demand eternal vigilance.
Vigilance.
And a willingness to confront reality, however stark or uncomfortable that reality might be, always seeking that delicate balance between aspiration and the practicalities of power.
Indeed. And it raises an important question for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. If political egoism is indeed the only sound principle of action for a great state, as Bismarck suggested, how does a nation today balance its self-interest with global cooperation and the pursuit of broader ethical goals? What responsibility does a strong nation truly bear beyond its own borders, especially when its strength is the security of Europe, as Bismarck claimed? Or perhaps the world now?
A tough question.
It is something to mull over as these tensions continue to shape our world today. Where does national interest end and global responsibility begin? Bismarck had his answer, but what's ours?